Hello and welcome to another Improve Your Chess video. And once again, I'll be covering how to learn from your chess mistakes and win more games. So in this series, I've been playing a friend of mine named John, who is, I guess, still a beginner. He's been playing chess off and on for a while. But anyway, he had the white pieces. I had black here. And as we see, I gained an advantage and just held on to that advantage, but there were some mistakes in the game that we can learn from. And he played at a 79.1 level, so, okay, not bad. And I played at 90.3, so I guess it's a little easier to play at a higher level once mistakes are made, because then the path is easier to follow. You kind of know what to do. Once you're ahead in material, you can just trade down pieces. So I had one great move. Now the mistakes that we can learn from. Three inaccuracies by John, one by me. Three mistakes by John, and I had two. And John had two missed opportunities. All right, here we go. So turn on the analysis, and the game began with e4 c6. So this is the Caro-Kann defense, and it's more of a little bit of a slower strategic game usually, and it depends what white does though. And here John plays the normal opening where if your opponent lets you gain control of the center, then by all means, you should just go ahead and put both pawns in the center. That's a good way to start. And then I play d5 to immediately fight and attack one of those pawns. Now, the normal moves are knight to c3, defending the pawn, capturing, exchanging here in the center, or even advancing to e5 to gain more space in the center. But my opponent plays something interesting here. The computer says this is a mistake, so let's see what we can learn from this mistake and how we can use it to help you win more games. So what looks bad about this? Well, hopefully you noticed it's a gambit called the Mises Gambit, where you just give away a pawn for something. What can you get in exchange for giving away this pawn? Well, hopefully faster development. So let's see what happens. I capture, which is the best move. So I just go ahead in material by a pawn here. Now I can try and hold on to this pawn or give it back. But let's see how it continues. Right away, John attacks the pawn. So I defend. The computer says that's a great move, but I don't know how great it is. That's just a normal defensive move there. And now an attack here. So the computer recommends that I just develop another piece and defend the pawn. But then I thought, well, maybe I could be attacked. But then I think I'd be okay. I just retreat. But anyway, moving on. I just go ahead and capture, which wasn't the best move, like bishop to f5, but it's still good. So now I hold on to my pawn, and I've captured another pawn. So it does help my opponent develop. So now if we look at this position, John has two knights and a bishop developed, and I only have one knight out in the game here. So the factor that will determine how this game goes is, will my extra pawn compensate for allowing my opponent to develop more pieces? So I need to hurry up and start developing here. So I go ahead and pin this knight. And when you're ahead in material, one strategy can be to trade down pieces. So I have this extra pawn. If I trade down all the pieces, I'll have an extra pawn at the end that hopefully I can promote to a queen. So let's see how the game goes. I pin. the best move is to attack and force this bishop to make a decision. So I decided to give up my bishop pair. Now the computer says this is an inaccuracy. Why? Because normally you want to keep your bishop pair, because by giving my bishop pair up, I give up my light squared bishop. My opponent is going to have an extra light squared bishop that he can use to attack all these light squares, and I won't have a bishop on the light squares to defend against his bishop. But I am trying to trade down material to use my extra pawn in the end game. So we have a capture. This is a mistake. Now, why is this a mistake? What can you learn from this move? So what do you think is bad about this? Well, it splits up your pawns. So now you have two weak isolated pawns. There's a hole over here on the king side. You know, you already only had two pawns over here. Well, now you have two pawns and they're separated and even weaker. At least pawns that are side by side can help defend each other a little bit. But now these lone pawns can become targets in the end game. So better would have been, of course, to capture with the queen. So if we had a queen capture, then the recommendation is that I just play e6 to get ready to develop my bishop, possibly, and then get ready to castle. But we had the pawn capture instead, leaving two weak isolated pawns. So how can I take advantage of those? Well, first I'm just going to continue developing. I play e6 to slow down the push of this pawn if he wants to attack. Now he can't, or I'll just capture with my pawn. And more importantly, it can allow me to develop my bishop. So John plays, this computer says it's an excellent move, but queen to d2 might have been a little bit better, creating a battery with with queen and bishop. So I develop my knight, and sometimes you want to develop your knights first. Well, in general, a general rule is to develop your knights before the bishops, because they're a little bit slower. So, by developing the slower knights, it gives you a little more time to figure out where would be best to place your bishop. Although I can only put my bishop here or here at the moment. Bishop to e7, d6, or b5. All right. Castling long, the best move. Bishop to e7. This is good, but maybe that's a little passive here. Computer prefers an immediate queen to e7, maybe with the option of moving over here and attacking this undefended pawn, but also I would be lined up on the king. So continuing on, we have the rook grabbing the open file, attacking my unprotected pawn. I probably would not want to castle, because then we have bishop to h6, attacking this pinned pawn, which wouldn't be able to capture because of the rook. That's if I castle kingside. And the only thing to do is maybe push forward, and then the bishop could capture my rook. So here I play g6 first to block the path of the rook. And now h4, the best move in the position. Pushing forward, maybe with the future plan of targeting this g-pawn. But the best move here for me now is to play knight to h5, blocking this pawn's future movement, and maybe allowing my knight to reposition up towards the center in the future. But I make a mistake. So what can we learn from this mistake? Well, if you have an option of advancing pieces forward or pushing a pawn, usually it's better to advance your pieces, hopefully putting them on better squares in the center of the board where they have more activity, where they're more active and can attack your opponent. But I should have looked for possible attacks on my king before I made this move, because the best move here that would keep the game about even is to sacrifice the rook. So let's take a look at this. What would happen? Well, first of all, what should I have played here? Knight to h5 apparently is best, blocking, and what do they recommend here? Knight to e4, just improving the position of the knight, threatening maybe to jump here in the future or here, or even here, just threatening to jump in here and attack this unprotected pawn. So in the position, or excuse me, in the game, h5 was played, and there's a rook sacrifice possibility, which was not played by my opponent. My opponent ended up playing bishop to g5, protecting his pawn, attacking my knight. And that was a missed opportunity that puts the game in black's favor. So the better move was this, sacrificing the rook. Now, the best move here is to just let white have that pawn and play knight over here to b6. So apparently that is best. That would even leave a slight edge with white. Now what would happen if I would capture here? Well, now white gets a little bit more of an advantage after capture with check. The king can do nothing but go to f8. And then what? Different options. Bishop. Can bishop be played to h6 with check? So maybe that's an option. What does the computer recommend? Knight to e4, bishop to h3, bishop to d3. Those moves, all right, first of all, I'm going to look at this. Okay, it does not like that move because once I capture with check, king can go up to f7. What now? The queen cannot capture because of this knight. So, I don't know. In that, I would be +2 ahead. So let's go back a little bit and see what those other moves would accomplish. So apparently knight to e4 is what the computer likes the most. And then what do we have? Bishop to b4. Interesting. Bishop to b4. The only thing I don't like about that, they could just drive the bishop back. Apparently d5, they like that better. Now it also recommends bishop to h6. Now it says that this would work. So capture, queen captures with check, king up to e7. I don't know, that doesn't look so great. They could just chase you back and forth here. All right, enough of that. Back to the game. So, what can we learn from the mistake? Here, don't push your pawns. Position your pieces where they're improving their scope and their activity. All right, the bishop pressed forward here. A mistake or a missed opportunity, I should say. The rook sacrifice would be better, but that would be a little bit difficult to see, especially for a beginner here. All right, knight to d5, the best move. I go about trying to trade down some material. I'm attacking the bishop and the knight at the same time. So if you're ahead, remember that. Ahead by material, trade down pieces. if you're behind, like John is here, behind one pawn, he should be trading off as many pawns as he can. So here he captures, and that just helps me out because now I can capture towards the center. Now I have two central pawns versus his one, and the C file is half open for the rook and queen to target the king in the future. Now we have this move. Bishop to h3, an inaccuracy. Apparently queen to e3 would be a little bit better. I guess to back up the bishop to line up on the king. But after this, I continue trading material. And a capture towards the center, usually that's good. Excuse me. But here, the rook capture would be better. Now, why is that? Well, once he captures with this pawn, I have a passed pawn over here on the H file that could be dangerous as the endgame goes further and further along. But now with this move, it kind of blocks my pawns a little bit better. The only thing I could do is start pushing this F pawn to chase the rook away, but I can't do that now because the pawn would be captured here on E6. But this is a little bit better move, although black still does have an edge here. All right, in the game, the pawn captured. So now I make a mistake, and I don't recall what I was thinking in this game because this game was played like July 14th, I believe. So, it's over a month ago this game was played. And the only thing I can think of is that perhaps I wanted to move here and target this. But, F4 could be played to protect it anyway. So maybe I wanted to go here and push this pawn in the future. Anyway, not a good move here. Retreating the knight back. The computer says the best thing would have been to advance the knight forward to the only square possible that allows the knight to go further up the board. So instead, I should have moved the knight up here. Maybe I could jump here in the future. But this is closer to the queen side over here where my opponent's king is. So that would have been a better move. So what can we learn from that mistake? It's better to move your pieces forward, usually. Now, sometimes you have to move back for defense or some other reason to reposition. But, this would have been a better move. All right, the game continued with this mistake, and now a missed opportunity with queen to b5, checking. So, why is this a mistake? Well, you don't want to just check anytime you have an opportunity, because every time there's a possible check, your opponent might have to think about that and add those possible checks to all his calculations. So it's better to just let a check hang in the air so that you have a possible check against your opponent, and they're always going to be thinking about that in the back of their head if they noticed it, and they'll have to throw that into their calculations. So it's better to hold off on a check unless you have a good follow-up. Now here, I guess my opponent's thinking, oh, check the king and attack the pawn at the same time, but I can just defend and block with my queen here and protect the pawn. So what should my opponent have done? Apparently king to b1. It's recommending that as best. And it's funny. I've seen this in other YouTube videos where chess masters talk about how good it is to move the king to b1 when you castle on the queen side. I guess it's a little bit safer there covers this A pawn, and the king is barricaded in a little bit better behind his pawns, I guess. So back to the game, we have a check, a block. Instead of trading immediately, better would have been to retreat, avoid piece trades, because my opponent John is behind, and you want to avoid trading the pieces. Instead, he should be trying to trade off as many pawns as he can to get rid of pawns, because every pawn that I have on the board could become a potential promoted pawn, to a queen. All right, so this move is played, and now I just trade off more material. So we have a recapture with check. The knight blocks, although an immediate king to e7 is recommended. And now pawn pushes forward to protect this other pawn. But my opponent is kind of running out of moves. And here he helps me out a little bit. It says this is the best move, but it just helps me trade off more material and try and use my extra passed pawn here to win in the end game. So the game continues with the rook lifting up to d3 here, and now we grab the semi or half open file, and this move is played, perhaps with an idea of pushing this pawn in the future, or maybe just to keep my rook from moving forward here. I grab more space. The computer likes this move. I could possibly push up to b5 and try and hold back both of these pawns in the future. So that idea is stopped with a3. And now we have rook moving forward, preparing to double the rooks. King steps out of the line of fire of the rooks, and I double here. So usually a good strategy to double up your rooks and apply pressure on a half open or even an open file or rank. And now protection is added to this pawn. So I start moving my pawns forward. And another thing to help you improve your chess is try and brush up or learn as much as you can. Study rook endgames, because these are one of the most common endgames where the rooks are the only pieces left along with the pawns, battling it out in the end. And they can be more complicated than they appear. So see what happens in this rook endgame. Here, John pushes forward, and this is the best move. Black is ahead by the equivalent of almost 2 pawns, even though we're only 1 pawn ahead here. And now I push forward. And it looks like, well, there's 2 attackers and only 1 defender. Is this move okay? It's not the best move, but it's still excellent. And I had a plan. I wanted to open up the C file and give even more activity to my 2 rooks here. And I had another even more hidden plan, which we'll see here in a minute. So capture, capture, and John did not recapture here. He makes a mistake with rook to c2. What would have been better? Apparently, it would have just been best here to go ahead, let's see, and capture. And then I could just move rook to b8 here. So rook to b8 and just regain my pawn. I guess if my opponent tried to cover that, I could chase the king away and then grab the pawn. So let's see what they recommend. The recommendation here is either rook to g1 or rook to c2. But anyway, I would be able to grab my pawn and get this pawn back, it looks like. But in the game, we had this mistake. So here, the best move is to capture the pawn, which I find the best move. And now we have capture. I capture again. And here my opponent retreats, which is the best move, but it allows me to target this F pawn and he won't be able to protect it. But let's see what would have happened if I captured here, or if John captured, sorry. We would have capture, capture, king captured, and then the pawn starts running here. So I have 1, 2, 3 moves to promotion. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and my king is able to stop it. This pawn, it's too far on the other side of the board for the king to make it over there. All right, so back to the game. We had a rook retreat, so I play the best move, going after this weak backward pawn here. And it's usually good if you have a choice of putting the rooks in front of the enemy pawn, to the side, or behind. It's usually best to get your rooks in behind your enemy pawns, then beside them, and then in front. There are exceptions, so you always got to double check. And for your own pawns as well, it's better to have them behind the passed pawns as they're pushing up the board, or beside them, but usually not as good when they're in front of the pawns. So the game continues with the rook moving over here, and the computer says this is excellent, but there's a problem with that move. And the problem is that I have rook to f2, which is what I played in the game, and the king cannot move forward because of this pawn. So we'll have to trade off rooks here. So after the king moves up, now I pick off the rook, and here my opponent resigned because after we have this capture, well, now this pawn only needs 4 moves to promote, and the king is all the way on the other side of the board. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that. Feel free to leave any comments that you would like. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.